Rachel Reeves addressed the House of Commons after days away from that front bench, having been to China to drum up business and try and counteract some of those market wobbles we've been seeing over the past 7 days. But did it work?
Rachel Reeves is getting demolished for her idiotic trip to China while the nation's economy burns.
I mean, this government is every bit as brutal and ghastly as Nazi Germany was back in the 1930s, but this government seems to think it wants to go and cozy up to them, which I find utterly astonishing for all those poor people that are being decimated by the Chinese government.
In an incredibly irresponsible move, Reeves is trying to get cozy with the nasty Chinese government.
I'm not a gambling man, but I would wager, if I did, that she will not be in post at the next general election, unless that general election is called tomorrow.
Exactly. I think she's going to be out of a job by June at the latest, possibly March at the earliest.
Things are looking grim as Rachel desperately tries to solve the mess she has created, but the country wants her gone.
To go or not to go? Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortunes, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Yes, Hamlet was quoted in the House of Commons today. Why? Because the Shadow Chancellor has questions to ask of Chancellor Rachel Reeves if she will stay or if she will go.
Rachel Reeves is desperately trying to hold on to her job as questions about her resignation are coming up.
Rachel Reeves addressed the House of Commons after days away from that front bench, having been to China to drum up business and try and counteract some of those market wobbles we've been seeing over the past 7 days. But did it work? Well, she was questioned over why she did not turn up in her place in the House of Commons last week to address the market wobbles as they began.
Her trip to China turned out to be a massive failure and the British economy is tanking despite it.
An urgent question was brought before the House of Commons, and instead of turning up herself, she sent her deputy. Today we learn that the Chancellor Rachel Reeves was indeed in the country when that urgent question was brought before the House of Commons, but instead of choosing to come and face the music, she decided to send an underling, Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, to face that question instead.
The terrified Rachel Reeves is running away like a coward and doing all she can to avoid this horrible situation.
Her entire shtick as Chancellor and as Shadow Chancellor was to be Mrs. Stability. Yes, Rachel Reeves, in the wake of the mini-budget under Liz Truss, said that Labour was the party that would deliver financial stability, that would deliver a lower cost of borrowing. However, what's happened in the last 7 days? Precisely the opposite.
She made a ton of promises about the stable economy and all that turned out to be nothing more than shameless lies.
How far have things gone south? Well, since the budget, the amount the government has to pay just to service the debt of this country has risen to £12 billion. That's billion with a B. Yes, the government is now having to shell out 12 billion more than it previously thought it would, simply to service its own debt. So it didn't help that the Chancellor raised 20 billion extra borrowing this year in her budget.
Things have gotten much worse than you can imagine and our economy is plummeting to record lows.
Changed the debt rule to allow her to borrow more, and borrow more she did, tens of billions more of borrowing, as well as tens of billions more in tax rises. The tax rises, of course, have pummeled business. The business group, the CBI, has been criticising the government for lumping all of the pain on business, and that seems to have dampened the growth rate. There's some analysis that suggests it's risen inflation too.
Reeves's misery budget has been all about fiddling the rules and clobbering the Brits with insane taxes.
Inflation goes up, prices rise, and markets take a weary eye to look at the United Kingdom and think, goodness me, is this the safest place to place our money? And if the international markets think that the UK is no longer a very safe place to place that money, the cost of debt rises. And then the Chancellor has a horrible situation.
She's being cornered from all sides as the entire world thinks that she's an incompetent Chancellor.
The Chancellor, frankly, is in a bind. and she needs to find some economic growth. But if she tries to raise taxes to fill in this new black hole that the Chancellor has seemingly created in the country's budget, well, how on earth does that create growth? More taxes usually leads to lower growth. And growth at the end of the day is what Rachel Reeves has always said is the #1 mission of this government.
Whatever decision this stupid government takes now will only bring more misery on the working class Brits, and the future's looking bleak. Rachel Reeves must find a way to increase growth and bring in more money to the public finances, but sadly, she has done everything wrong and growth has stagnated. That leaves our beloved Chancellor with the horrible choices of either milking our pockets dry with another tax raid or worsening this country's quality of life. Needless to say, she's the one responsible for creating this situation, and it's no wonder that everyone is demanding her resignation. Meanwhile, the trip to China was a huge failure in more ways than you think.
Rachel Reeves has just come back from China, having got what might be described as a pretty paltry deal, £600 million worth of investment, which is approximately 60 times less than Indonesia got, 30 times less than Peru got. What do you make of the government's approach to China at the moment?
Well, it's a mess. The government has got this absurd idea that if they rush to China on their bended knees, China somehow is going to give them the thing they need for growth, which has collapsed as a result of their budget.
In what can only be described as a series of incredibly stupid decisions, Reeves and Starmer have been trying to cozy up to China. Of course, that is a horrible idea for multiple reasons, and it's obvious that China sees us as a threat. Rachel Reeves quite literally humiliated herself by going to China just to secure a measly deal that won't fix our economy one single bit. The fact that we got a much worse deal than other, smaller countries should tell you enough about what the Chinese government thinks of us. On top of all that, China isn't the saint that Starmer and Rachel Reeves think they are.
Going to China is a terrible decision. China is guilty of genocide in Xinjiang amongst the Uyghur, which is the eradication of a whole ethnic group. Most of the men are now in slave labor. They work on products like, for example, the solar arrays that we import now as a result of the government's policy on net zero, which is mad. We're importing thousands of these things, but they're made in China, and polysilicon is part of them, and that is made basically in Xinjiang by slave labor.
How shameful is it for us to try and make tiny deals with a government that engages in the worst possible things humanity can imagine? In fact, there was a report by the United Nations that stated China has committed crimes against humanity. Now, all of a sudden, Rachel Reeves and Starmer seem to have no problem with becoming friends with a nation like that. It only goes to show how desperate Rachel Reeves is to somehow fix the huge mess she has created in the British economy.
I mean, it goes on and on. They're threatening Taiwan. They're threatening a blockade. They're threatening to basically invade. They're building a navy at a rate of knots you simply can't believe. This is a threatening country, and the government is behaved astonishingly in turning over what was going on before and now acting as though they are a great ally and friend, which is an utter disaster. It'd be like we were doing in the 1930s, ignoring the threat of Hitler.
China's aggression doesn't just end with their internal policies either. They have been ramping up their aggression and making their military stronger with each passing day. And what is Rachel Reeves doing with such a threatening nation that also happens to be strong allies with Russia? She's bending the knee and showing to the world just how desperate she is. On top of all that, it's like announcing to everyone that we're in such a weak state right now that we'll stoop that low.
Yeah, I think this is the most ill-informed and poor Secretary of State for the Environment as possible to imagine having put in post. The reality is that China went from nowhere in the production of solar arrays and all the other net zero stuff, went from absolutely nowhere in the last 10 years to dominant in the world. How do they do that? They do it because against WTO rules, the Chinese central bank subsidizes all bids of Chinese companies.
It doesn't help that we have lunatics in our government as well. They're forcing the net zero nonsense down our throats and will do anything to achieve it. This government couldn't care less how much they hurt the British economy and people as long as they can continue to push their socialist agenda. Of course, all of these green solar panels are also being imported from China, and all the while China continues to use fossil fuels and get an advantage over us. There's a reason why their economy is so much better than ours.
They use slave labor, and slave labor means you don't pay anybody any money. They have to do this under threat of bullying, violence and death. And this is going on all the time. As I said earlier on, polysilicon, which is made in Xinjiang, is made by slave labor. This has been completely ignored by the British government, who say that they would stand up against slave labor. And I asked them a question of that yesterday. And the reality is they're already importing thousands of these arrays, which they want to litter across the countryside in this mad rush to net zero, no matter what the cost to consumers.
The Chinese government stops at quite literally nothing to achieve their goal, and make no mistake, they're coming for us. The Chinese have been violating every single human right there is, and Starmer, who used to be a human rights lawyer, seems to have no problems with these dodgy deals that Rachel Reeves is signing with them. If anything, he said on national TV that he has full confidence in her, and that just goes to show how out of touch with reality he is.
Yeah, this is a government that likes to jump into swimming pools when the water's running out.
Yeah.
So let's just look at this. The European Union is now talking about tariffs on electric cars. China made a decision to tell all of their battery companies, by the way, they've dominated battery production for years. Every battery used in cars in the UK, in electric vehicles, are made in China. And we'll never be able to compete with on that again because of the points I made earlier on. A lot of the minerals that are used in this are mined and used, made by slave labor.
The majority of the bashing that Rachel Reeves has been getting on the China move is simply because there were much better options. People are questioning why she hasn't tried signing more deals with the United States or other European countries, and the answer is baffling. Rachel Reeves has all her priorities wrong, and at this rate, she'll be thrown out of the government much sooner than we'd expect.
I mean, this government is every bit as brutal and ghastly as Nazi Germany was back in the 1930s, but this government seems to think it wants to go and cozy up to them, which I find utterly astonishing for all those poor people that are being decimated by the Chinese government.
It is nothing short of disgusting and disgraceful that Starmer and his cronies are trying to get close with China. Rachel Reeves seems to have forgotten everything that Britain stands for, and she's throwing away all our values by bending the knees and signing pathetic little deals with countries that are as ghastly as China. Considering the fact that everyone hates this move, will the desperate Rachel Reeves be sacked? And more importantly, Starmer might be thrown out with her.
Treasury in turmoil as the pound takes another battering. The pound is at its lowest against the dollar and the euro now since I think the last century. The Prime Minister scrambles to shore up his flailing Chancellor and is forced to declare full confidence in her scandal-hit deputy. You will know, of course, from your time in the football world, being a fan of many years of QPR, whenever the management is given the full backing and confidence of the directors, that usually signals the beginning of the end, doesn't it?
Things are looking really shaky for Rachel Reeves for a number of reasons. Firstly, our economic state is frankly in the gutter. Rachel Reeves has brought Britain to its knees, and no matter how you look at it, there might be a market crash coming soon. On the other hand, Labour's pressuring the already desperate Rachel to either fix the mess she has created or pack her bags. Starmer's public support for her isn't because he's happy with her performance, it's simply because Starmer is looking out for himself.
When you look at these two, I mean, they occupy senior positions in this government.
The other one, of course, being Tulip Siddiq, the bizarrely named anti-corruption minister who appears to be embroiled in an awful lot of corruption in Bangladesh.
And works within the same department as Rachel Reeves.
Of course.
Yeah. And you look at the two of them on the front page of the Mail today, and you just think, is this the top talent that this government has to offer?
This is the best they could get.
Because clearly it is.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're in stuck. Deep stuck.
The Labour Party is in a huge crisis right now. The best and the brightest that they have to offer are either resigning because of endless scandals, like Tulip Siddiq, who's being investigated over corruption charges, or they're simply way too incompetent to keep around, like Rachel Reeves. If this is Starmer's top team that he promised to bring change and stability with, then we can only expect more misery coming our way throughout the years.
People in finance, and I know lots of people that work in finance, the one thing they're very good at is basically seeing an opportunity and going for it. And they don't care about the welfare of Britain. They don't care about whether or not you and I are going to have to stump up some more taxes. What they care about is making a profit. And when they see an injured animal on the floor, they send the vultures down to pick it up and eat it. And that's what they're doing. And they're absolutely eating the hell out of Rachel Reeves' animal.
The only ones that are happy with Rachel Reeves are the hardcore finance people who are using her idiotic policies to make as much money as they can. Of course, they're betting against Britain and they're reaping huge benefits because Rachel Reeves has been a consistent disaster for the economy.
But to put it in a nutshell, this Labour government couldn't run a bath.
They really couldn't. They are so bad. Let's have a look at Keir Starmer yesterday. So he was making this big set-piece speech, which a lot of people said, why is he making a set-piece speech about AI when there's so many other problems? The economy is down the gurgler, as we've said. Rachel Reeves is away in China. We've got a deal from China which is 60 times worse than the one that Indonesia got, right? We've got the NHS, people sitting on trolleys for 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours. You know, the whole business, the grooming gangs, there's so much going on.
It's not just Rachel Reeves alone that has been shambolic for this nation. The whole Labour Party is incompetent and rotten to its very core. We have half a dozen ongoing scandals, a dozen other problems, and Keir Starmer is busy giving useless speeches about AI and whatnot. They've got all their priorities wrong, and we're the ones suffering for it.
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence. She has the full confidence of the entire party.
So what does that mean? She has the full confidence of the entire party?
It's waffle.
Really?
Whenever he goes off script,
Yeah.
he just stumbles, falls, trips up,
Yeah.
cannot speak.
No.
Because he does not have...
How can he be this bad at public speaking?
He doesn't have the intellectual dexterity to be able to go off script.
Yeah.
He's so robotic.
How pathetic is it that Starmer can't even deliver a speech without making a fool out of himself? He says that Rachel Reeves is doing a great job, but that's an obvious lie because she's running around scared. The whole country can see that he's just buying time and trying to do damage control while our economy burns in the background. Either that or Starmer is just too tone deaf and delusional to see the reality.
I'm not a gambling man, but I would wager, if I did, that she will not be in post at the next general election, unless that general election is called tomorrow.
Exactly. I think she's going to be out of a job by June at the latest, possibly March at the earliest.
Yeah, and of course it's just blatant untruth, isn't it? There's no way she'll be Chancellor for another 4.5 years, and in fact it's highly unlikely, I think, that this government will survive for another 4.5 years.
Exactly.
Rachel Reeves would be lucky if she could last the entire term as the Chancellor of this country. One thing's for sure, that nobody will trust her with this job ever again. Starmer and Reeves have managed to single-handedly destroy the Labour Party from within, and now they've lost all credibility. People regret ever voting for them, and there's simply no way that they'd win another election anytime soon. Despite all this, Starmer is struggling to sack Rachel Reeves, and there's a very obvious reason for that.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, had a challenging week in the markets as the price of government debt rose and the pound fell while she went to China. When first asked about her position, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, failed to say that she would remain in her post until the election. The collaboration between Prime Minister and Chancellor lies at the heart of government. What have been the consequences of the troubled relationships?
No matter what government we talk about, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have to be united, or else they're bound to fail with a huge disaster. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, as Starmer is struggling to keep supporting Rachel Reeves. Naturally, given the blunders Reeves is making, it's no wonder that Starmer has no faith in her, but this might backfire for him in a way he does not expect yet.
What do you think would have been the impact on Rachel Reeves and her office when the Prime Minister couldn't at first find it in his mouth to say, of course she'll stay until the general election at least?
Well, I think it showed a certain ignorance by the Prime Minister of the reality of the relationship. Had he got rid of Rachel Reeves, he would have gone within a month or two. I mean, that is what happens. He would have been so weakened. And here's why. Because her policy was his policy.
To say that Starmer is ignorant would be an understatement. The moment Starmer decides to get rid of Rachel Reeves, he'll be thrown out by the Labour Party shortly after for very simple reasons. While Rachel Reeves is busy sinking the Labour Party's ships, Starmer can't even stay united with her anymore because he's too greedy for power. Unfortunately for him, if Reeves goes, so will he, because everything Labour has done so far, Starmer had a hand in it. Unfortunately, this might turn out to be an even bigger disaster for us.
But also, there's no one else to have taken the place. Nobody, I mean, he is on cloud cuckoo land if he thinks there was anybody else who could do the job. I mean, the only person with a smidgen of a chance is somebody who knew the Treasury from the inside out, been a cabinet minister, been the leader of the party, and that's Ed Miliband. And he wouldn't have worked either because there's no policy. So, they stand or they fall together. That's a lesson of the last 40 years.
As useless as Rachel Reeves is, the Labour Party doesn't have anyone better to replace her. So, if things are horrible right now, they'll be much worse if Rachel Reeves is sacked. No matter how you look at it, the British public is in for a rough ride for the next few years, and Labour is to blame for all of it. We know that Starmer is pretty delusional, but trusting the economy to someone worse than Rachel Reeves could be a huge disaster. Rachel Reeves knows that Starmer can't sack her yet, and maybe that's why she doesn't seem to care.
But I think it's also becoming, I've always thought that the Chancellor was becoming more and more significant, but it's the Chancellor impotence. I mean, none of them have been able to get significant productivity growth or growth in the economy since the global financial crisis. The levers at the Chancellor's disposal have got narrower and narrower. So, it's very hard. We've had 8 Chancellors, 8 in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
The previous 40 years only saw 8. So the churn is 4 times quicker in the last 10 years.
We're seeing an epidemic of horrible Chancellor, and that goes to show just how incompetent the Labour Party is. Everything that they have to offer right now is either mediocre or simply pathetic. All the promises that Starmer made during the elections were simply too good to be true, and we now realise that they lied to the entire nation. We've been misled into believing that this government had the slightest clue on how to run things.
And someone like Ken Clarke, and possibly even Rachel Reeves today, Ken knew that he couldn't be sacked, and that gave him an extraordinary amount of power. If Rachel Reeves decides that she can't be sacked, that'll give her a lot of power too.
Absolutely. And he will have to, and she understands. I mean, Keir Starmer doesn't understand economics. That gives you a big strength as Chancellor. She is there for the duration.
The bottom line is that we've given way too much power to this Chancellor, and she knows that she can't be replaced anytime soon. So what's she doing? Going ahead with whatever nonsense that comes to her mind, regardless of the consequences. Since Starmer is too useless to understand the reality of things, Rachel Reeves gets a free pass till she's eventually sacked and Starmer is forced out along with her. Our only hope is to hold them accountable, and that's something you can help out with by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.